Hi, I'm Brian. Welcome to Autogefuhl and welcome to Mazda's MX-30, Mazda's first fully electric car. Okay, so that's not completely true. It isn't Mazda's entirely first attempt at a fully electric car, but it is their first main production one. So it's a pretty important unit. Now, just in case you're a bit confused by the MX moniker, I think it represents a bold choice. MX is what Mazda usually use to stand for their special project vehicles. Nowhere more famously applied than, of course, the MX-5, the most popular two-seater sports car in history. So they're making a pretty big statement here. So what is it? Well, it's not quite Mazda 3 and it's not quite Mazda CX-30 either. It sits somewhere in between. And although you can see that in lots of distinct places in the styling, the front is not one of those places. So, interestingly, Mazda have decided to go with what is by now a quite familiar looking front. And why not? There's a lot of style and design here that's really popular, but there's nothing now to denote this as their first fully electric car. I find that a really interesting decision. 4 meters 39 or 173 inches. If the front left you thinking this could be a CX-30, well, all of that's gone by the time you hit the side. Not least, okay, I'll give you, it's pretty subtle. The placing of the word electric here should give you a hint, and this nicely embossed, or rather sunk in, Mazda logo in the side panel. But those really are just small touches compared visually to what's going on with the side here. We have a real crossover siding. 18-inch wheels, sorry, I'm making Cornelius go up and down rather a lot, which are combined with this black plastic trim that wraps the whole way around the vehicle. Now, for my taste, what works rather nicely at the front and pretty well on the side too, especially in contrast with this paint color, well, it's not a complete success story when we get round to the back. We've got this contrasting color on the rear top, and that really looks nice, modern and stylish. The integration of the light into the rear really ties up well. Obviously, I like the new lighting design, so down a little bit lower, you can see how this familiar light cluster looks, again, really nicely tied into the design. Well, we all know the rear of the Mazda 3. It looks pretty perky, a little cheeky, slightly enlarged back on the road. And we know the CX-30, that presents as being a little bit more bulbous. Bulbous, that's bulbous and bulky combined into one word. But this guy is neither one thing or the other to me visually. This whole bottom section in black, and here fortunately because you have matching paint and bumper, it isn't quite as present visually, really makes it look a little bit like a simply jacked up Mazda 3. Now let's take a look at the inside. Well, the first thing of note on the MX-30 is, of course, how you get into it. And you will notice that here we have what are traditionally known as suicide doors. I've opened the doors on the other side just so you can see the dramatic visual effect right the way through. Now, at varying different times of the automotive industry, there have been lots of attempts to rename these things: coach doors, flexi doors, freestyle doors, but none of them have really quite taken off, and the reason is self-evident. Now, just in case you're not familiar with them, the reason these are called suicide doors is, of course, because traditionally, should your door happen to open while you're going down the motorway, well, as you can see, the wind's going to push it shut. The problem traditionally with this design is that if it opens, the wind is just going to blow it right the way open, and you, of course, could be dragged out. Well, that's by tradition. These things date all the way back to before motor vehicles even existed. So the idea behind them is they allow easier and fuller access to the car. In the modern world, the reason that they're most commonly used is for visual presentation. As you can see, it's quite dramatic without any B-pillar at all, although that isn't the only way of doing this. Sometimes both of the doors are hinged off the B-pillar in the middle. But really, I have to say, traditionally, it's mostly a gimmick because it does present additional issues with the car. And I'm going to show you one of those right now if I get Cornelius just to back away. Now, according to Mazda, this is a safety feature, which is fairly obvious. You can't get in or out of this rear door without the front one being open. The advantage of this is if you have children in the back, clearly they're not going to be able to create that danger by accidentally opening the door. The downside to that is that if I'm approaching this car with a package for the rear, well, you can see the problem. And as I only have one hand free, it's just not the most convenient thing. So much has happened here to make this car look really, really modern. It is their first fully electric vehicle, so I think it's very important to them that it presents as being very new, very modern, and very stylish. Look at the detailing on these seats. So even though it looks like finished leather on the outer edge of this car, it isn't. Everything here is either made from recycled materials, there's a lot of that in the doors, or it's made with sustainable materials. There are two trim levels available in Mazda's human modern design concept. Modern confidence and industrial vintage, which is what you're looking at here. Now, if you're interested in taking a look at modern confidence, Thomas did a review on that style already, so take a look in the comments and we'll link to it below. This one, as you can tell, is a lot darker and more somber. I'm 5 feet 10 or 178 centimeters, but as regular viewers will know, I have a particularly long torso and particularly short legs. So what that means is for height, you can compare me at around about 6 feet 1. And obviously for legs, well, like I said, this is how a short person is going to sit within the vehicle. Everything here resonates quality. The use of materials is excellent. Everything that you can see, feel, touch, and interact with is just really nicely put together. If I switch on the power, you get your first look at the Mazda's full digital system. Now, here in the cockpit, you can see we have a mixture of digital display in the middle and analog displays either side giving us the information. I like this blend. I'm not really personally a huge fan of purely digital displays. For me, it removes a little bit of the emotion. So I'm happy to see that here, what we have is a combination of modern and traditional. Coming over to the middle section, there's an 8.8 inch display here. And Mazda have decided to go with a non-touch format. Now, as you can see, okay, I don't have the world's biggest arms, but it would be pretty inconvenient to use if they had gone with touch. And this would be my first disappointment. They didn't want you to go without a touchscreen. Oh no. They parked a 7-inch touchscreen right here, right behind the gear stick, and for reasons I will never fully understand, use it as the heating and cooling controls. Talking about materials, we come to this. Now, Mazda claim that this is the first time that cork has ever been used in a full production vehicle. I don't know if that's 100% true, but I would be really interested if you could tell me that it has already featured in any other cars. What I can tell you is that we're filming this just outside of Porto in Portugal, and you may or may not be aware that Portugal produces 50% of the world's cork. Why should you care about that? Well, it's a very sustainable material. It uses less water produced than most other materials, and clearly you can grow it again, which is actually pretty great. The cork manufacturers are enthusiastic to point out that it doesn't only have standard applications that you're familiar with, but it plays a really important role in creating a sustainable future. This being Mazda's first electric car, that's clearly a very important point to them. Now, if you think that cork only has basic applications, the cork manufacturers took us round yesterday and showed us about, and they wanted to tell us that amongst the many other things you can do with cork, it's even been featured on the nose cone of space rockets. Now, I don't know about you, Cornelius, but I kind of was wondering at that point if they were pulling my leg. Cork, famously wood, famously flammable. I don't know, they seemed quite convinced though. They did have models. So if you have any evidence that backs that up, I would be really interested to hear about it. In the meantime, what I did get from the experience is an understanding that cork is actually pretty integral, not least as a carbon sink, in terms of how we approach a sustainable future. And that's relevant because for Mazda, they say they want a fully electric fleet by 2030. Obviously, that doesn't mean only electric, that also includes hybrid. And they claim that they're going for 0 carbon emissions by 2050. So this is their nod to the future and how they start seeing more and more sustainable vehicles coming out using more recycled materials and more lower carbon materials. Now we come to the rear of the car, and for me this really is the Achilles heel of the design. This is a perfect exemplar of style over substance. If you buy this car, I suspect it's either going to be because you only have 2 people to worry about and this is an occasional use thing, so it really isn't that important. Either that or you just love this design and you could absolutely be forgiven for buying it for those reasons. But if you have multiple children as I do, well, let's start with getting in. I'm not a big person, but that is not a particularly easy process. Now, That's the noise you're going to hear if you don't shut the rear portion of the door first. I'm going to keep it open just for noise. I think it's important to point out there is a button here which makes life easier for you to get in and out of the car. But realistically speaking, when it's raining and you have groceries, are you going to be doing this in the back of a car? I don't think so. So after you've loaded your elegant ladies into the rear, how are you going to figure out where their hat boxes go? Let's take a look. Well, that is an extremely generous 366 litres of load space. I left my luggage in just so you could take a look. I think you'll agree that's actually more than sufficient for most people's needs. There's a little extra storage here for the charge cables required and some emergency kit supplies too. Oh my goodness, did somebody steal my engine? Now, without meaning to state the obvious too much, I would say the main reason for that is obviously enough that this car was designed with internal combustion engines in mind. So this is of course an adaptation of the chassis that was already available. I expect as we move through, we're going to see much more chassis design that's in keeping with electric engines. But for now, what you're looking at is a 35.5 kilowatt battery powered engine, which gives you a system output of 145 horsepower. Now that translates in principle to a 260 kilometer range on the battery, but that is under test conditions, and in practice you're talking much closer to around about 200 kilometers or around about 125 miles in real world usage. That is going to give you a performance of 0 to 62 miles per hour of about 9.7 seconds, 6.6 AC or 50 kilowatt DC charging. Right, let's take a closer look at how this drives. So right from the get-go, I can tell you that we're reporting a 98% charge on our battery, which according to the car gives us an electric range of 202 kilometers. So I think that's probably a little bit more representative of the 200 that we predicted in real world usage. Driving through the small roads outside in the towns and villages just outside of Porto gives us a good chance to talk about the driving experience of this car. Now I'm well aware that these are not the most exciting roads in the world. We're limited to 50 kilometers per hour, but that does give me the opportunity to tell you about the overall experience of being behind the wheel in this car. First of all, you're going to find wanting to drive a little bit faster than the roads will permit. So handily, this car comes with adaptive cruise control and of course speed limiter as standard equipment, which is really useful. But what I like even more than that is that the way Mazda have decided to apply regenerative braking to this car. So we're familiar with flappy paddles that allow us to change the gears in a standard internal combustion engine. Of course, you don't have that here, but what you do have is those same paddles being used to apply different levels of regenerative braking, 5 different modes, and they feel an awful lot like a gear change. Why? Well, go down and you have a greater regenerative capacity, go up and more rolling experience. So I'll show you what I mean. Currently limited to 70 kilometers per hour, and if I'm a little bit worried about going too fast, the easiest way to address that is to downshift twice, which maximizes our regeneration. If I take my foot off the accelerator, wow, you can feel that drag. Now, in earlier electric cars, that was really super boring because generally it only came in one flavor and that really ruined your driving experience. But in this car, because you have the ability to adjust different levels, it's actually really pleasing. And the reason being that once you get onto roads like this in particular or around town, you can more or less forget about your need to brake. You can just use that recuperation to do the entire job for you. It was actually quite fun earlier on just seeing how long we could use that instead of doing any braking whatsoever. And the answer is really quite a lot. So good, you're saving wear and tear on the vehicle, but you're also managing to save your driving license from getting unnecessary points. Now, when you get outside of town and you don't really want that drag because you want to do a little bit of driving, then you can put that system into reverse. Standard drive mode is a nice balance of both because, as you can see there, they're letting the battery wait do most of the work of slowing you down. So it's not as if you're entirely unimpeded, but it really isn't enough to affect the drive. Now, handling of the car. Well, have to take my hat off to Mazda in terms of the steering. I think they've really nailed the sweet spot here. It's a very nice balance indeed between precision and also managing that weight. There's that power again. And I think that sound is something that I'm actually going to really enjoy. Now, this road should give us a bit of a capacity to see how that weight performs once you put it into a corner. You can see it really handles very nicely. Bit of a bend coming up. No roll, great distribution, and the brakes really nicely deal with that weight, especially given that we're going downhill at the moment, over 80 kilometers per hour, and I still feel fully in control of this vehicle. Well, you would hope so. I guess what I'm wanting to say is I'm very impressed with the way that it all comes together as a driving experience. Now, speaking about driving experience, seating position, great. Hats off. I think this is a hard segment to make nice, in particular because of the limited visibility back here. Now here, of course, we don't have a B-pillar, but because of that, we have much, much thicker, heavier door sills, and that presents an entirely different challenge. So if I move my head over here to check my blind spot, I can see literally nothing at all. So it's a good thing that this comes as standard with a blind spot detector, and it's good. There are lots of cyclists on these roads, and that has kept us safe all the way throughout. The entire cockpit experience is actually very pleasing indeed. Those materials that look nice and feel nice to touch interact with each other really well to deliver a very pleasing driving experience.